Sterile Millionaire gets a homeless woman pregnant and discovers something extremely disturbing. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories. The rising sun reflected off the mirrored windows of the towering Harrison Enterprises building in the heart of Manhattan's business district. On the 45th floor, Alexander Harrison watched the city wake up through the windows of his corporate penthouse. At 38, he personified success. Perfectly styled dark hair, athletic build maintained by regular workouts, and a penetrating gaze that intimidated even the most experienced executives. On that autumn morning, while adjusting his Italian tie, his reflection in the glass made him question whether all that empire really filled the void he carried. The diagnosis of sterility, received 5 years earlier, still echoed in his mind like a definitive sentence. Total impossibility of having children, were the words of Dr. Richard Matthews, the family doctor for decades. Mr. Harrison, your first meeting of the day will begin in 15 minutes, announced Sarah, his executive assistant, interrupting his thoughts. Alexander nodded, recomposing his usual mask of coldness. The boardroom was full of executives when he entered. Among them was his cousin Eric Harrison, the company's CFO and his right-hand man in business. Eric's presence always caused an inexplicable discomfort in Alexander, especially since the sterility diagnosis. "Gentlemen, the expansion project for the West Coast needs to be accelerated," Alexander began, his deep voice filling the room. "We cannot miss the window of opportunity that has opened with our competitors' crisis." While discussing strategies and numbers, his mind occasionally wandered to 6 months ago, when an unexpected encounter changed something inside him. It was on a rainy night after a charity event. He had dismissed his driver, needing solitude to process another family discussion about his succession. At a red light on Fifth Avenue, his eyes met those of a young woman selling flowers. It wasn't her beauty that impacted him, though it was remarkable, but the dignity in her gaze, even soaked by the rain. In an impulse, he still didn't understand today, he offered her a ride. She hesitated, but the intensifying storm convinced her. "Emma," she said simply, entering the car. The jasmine perfume she emanated, mixed with rain, was etched in his memory. They talked throughout the journey, as if they were old acquaintances. Emma had a unique way of seeing the world, a wisdom that didn't come from books, but from life. That night ended in his penthouse apartment in the Upper East Side. A night of intense, true passion, different from anything he had ever experienced. For the first time, Alexander felt truly connected to someone, but the next morning, the weight of his responsibilities and his supposed defect made him pull back. He left an envelope with money on the bedside table and left before she woke up, convinced it was better that way. "Alexander, do you agree with the strategy?" Eric's voice brought him back to the present. The meeting continued, and all eyes were fixed on him. "Present the revised numbers by the end of the day," he responded automatically, years of experience allowing him to maintain control even when his mind was distant. After the meeting, alone in his office, Alexander found himself thinking about Emma again. Since that night, he had sent people to find her without success. It was as if she had disappeared in the massive city. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Harrison, there's an emergency in the lobby. Apparently a man has fallen ill and needs medical assistance. And why are they informing me about this? You're the only one who can authorize access for the ambulance through the private entrance, since the main access is blocked by construction." Alexander sighed, grabbing his jacket. As he entered the panoramic elevator, he didn't imagine that his life was about to change completely. Fate, ironic in its nature, was setting the stage for a reunion that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself. The panoramic elevator descended rapidly, while Alexander checked messages on his cell phone. The doors opened on the ground floor, and the characteristic buzz of an emergency filled his ears. He crossed the luxurious marble lobby with firm steps, but something made him stop abruptly. Kneeling next to an elderly gentleman who was being attended to was her, Emma. His heart instantly accelerated upon recognizing her. She wore simple but clean clothes, and her brown hair was tied in an improvised bun. Her skilled hands were assisting the gentleman, keeping him conscious until help arrived. "Breathe slowly, Mr. Anderson. Help is on its way," she said in a serene voice that Alexander would recognize anywhere. Her gaze demonstrated the same dignity that had captivated him months ago, but there was something different about her, something he couldn't identify precisely. The paramedics arrived and took over. Emma discreetly stepped back, and it was then that their eyes met. The recognition was immediate, and Alexander could swear he saw a flicker of surprise and perhaps hurt in her green eyes. "Do you work here?" Alexander asked, approaching her as the doctors tended to the patient. "No," she answered dryly. "I was passing by when I saw Mr. Anderson fall ill. He's a candy seller who's always been kind to me." The coldness in her voice hit him like a slap. It was different from the warm woman he had met on that rainy night. Emma began to walk away, but Alexander followed her to the sidewalk. "Emma, wait. I tried to find you." She turned, and for the first time Alexander noticed the changes in her body. Her belly, though discreetly, showed signs of early pregnancy. Her face, though paler, had a different glow. "For what?" "To leave another envelope with money," she questioned, her voice laden with irony. Alexander felt the weight of guilt, but before he could respond, a car at high speed mounted the sidewalk out of control. In an impulse, Emma pushed him aside, saving him from the impact. The car hit a pole, and the driver, apparently having a sudden illness, was quickly rescued. In the midst of the confusion, Emma tried to disappear again, but this time Alexander was quicker. He gently held her arm, noticing how she trembled slightly. "Are you okay? Do you need a doctor?" he asked, genuinely concerned. "I'm fine," she answered, freeing herself from his touch. "And I don't need anything from you." "You just saved my life," Alexander insisted. "At least let me—" "It was nothing," she cut him off. "I would have done the same for anyone." But when she took 2 steps, her legs weakened. Alexander supported her quickly, and for the first time noticed how much thinner she was, despite the pregnancy. His protective instinct spoke louder. "You need to sit down, have some water, come with me to my office." "I can't," she hesitated. "I have an important appointment." "Emma?" His voice came out softer than he intended. "Please, 5 minutes. Then you can go wherever you want, and if you never want to see me again, I'll respect that." Something in his tone made her yield. Maybe it was fatigue, maybe the memory of what they had shared, or maybe just the need for a moment of rest. She agreed with a discreet nod. In the elevator, the silence was heavy. Alexander observed her reflection in the mirror, noticing how she protectively embraced her own belly. A suspicion began to form in his mind, but it was impossible. He was sterile. All the tests confirmed it. Arriving at the office, Sarah greeted them with a curious look, but Alexander dismissed any interruption. He led Emma to the leather sofa near the panoramic window. "Why did you never look for me?" he asked, pouring water into a crystal glass. Emma accepted the water, but her eyes were fixed on the city below. "And why should I? You made it clear that it was just one night." "It wasn't just one night for me," he confessed, surprising himself with his honesty. She finally looked at him and her eyes were watery. "It doesn't matter anymore, Alexander. What happened, happened. Now we each go our own way. You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she answered, standing up. "And before you ask, yes, they are your children. They're twins. But don't worry, I didn't come here to—" Alexander felt the world spin. Twins. His children. But how? "Doctor." Matthew's words echoed in his mind, confronting the reality before him. "This is impossible," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "I'm sterile." Emma laughed humorlessly. "Well, apparently, you're not as sterile as you thought." She walked to the door, but before leaving, she turned one last time. "I didn't come after you before, and I wouldn't now. Fate wanted us to meet today, but this changes nothing. My children and I will be fine on our own." The door closed, leaving Alexander in a whirlwind of emotions and questions. His life, which seemed so controlled just an hour ago, was now completely turned upside down. And for the first time in years, he felt that he needed to discover the truth, no matter the cost. Alexander remained motionless for long minutes after Emma's departure, her words echoing in his mind. The sterility diagnosis, which for years had been an absolute truth in his life, was now crumbling before his eyes. With mechanical movements, he picked up the phone. "Sarah, cancel all my appointments for today and try to locate Dr. Richard Matthews. It's urgent." While waiting, he opened his laptop and began researching false sterility diagnoses. His hands trembled slightly as he typed. With each piece of information he found, an old conversation with his cousin Eric came back to memory. a discussion about the company's succession, where Eric had mentioned with a strange smile that, at least they didn't have to worry about unexpected heirs. "Mr. Harrison," Sarah's voice sounded through the intercom. "Doctor, Matthews is traveling, but I managed to get his personal number." Alexander wasted no time. He dialed the number immediately, his breathing heavy as he waited. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Richard Matthews." "Doctor, this is Alexander Harrison. We need to talk about my sterility diagnosis." A heavy silence settled on the line. When the doctor spoke again, his voice was different, almost fearful. "Alexander, I'm abroad now. Can we talk when I get back?" "No, we'll talk now." Alexander's voice came out sharp. "I just found out I'm going to be a father of twins. How is this possible considering your diagnosis?" Another silence, longer this time. Finally, a deep sigh. "I'm sorry, Alexander. Your original test never indicated sterility." The revelation hit Alexander like a punch to the stomach. His suspicions were confirmed, but the reality was even more painful than he had imagined. "Continue," he ordered, his voice dangerously calm. "Your cousin Eric approached me before I delivered the results. He had compromising documents about my professional conduct. He said he would destroy them if I altered your diagnosis. I was about to lose my medical license, my reputation." Alexander abruptly hung up the phone. His entire world was crumbling. Years of his life based on a lie, manipulated by his own family. And Emma was pregnant with his children, living in precarious conditions while he lived in his ivory tower. He stood up abruptly, grabbing his jacket. He needed to find her again, but where to start? New York was gigantic, and she clearly didn't want to be found. Then he remembered the gentleman she had helped in the lobby, Mr. Anderson, the candy seller. He quickly went down to the ground floor, where he found the gentleman already recovered, organizing his candies in a small box. "Mr. Anderson, can I talk to you for a moment?" The vendor looked at him curiously. "Of course, sir. The young woman who helped you today, Emma. Do you know her?" The old man's face lit up. "Ah, little Emma. Good girl, always kind to everyone. She's going through hard times, poor thing, but even so, she never loses her dignity. Do you know where I can find her?" Mr. Anderson hesitated, clearly protective. "She helps with the soup kitchen at St. Patrick's Cathedral on Wednesdays. That's all I know." It was a Wednesday. Alexander looked at his watch. 5:45 p.m. If he went now, he might be able to find her. But first, he needed to resolve a family matter. "Sarah," he spoke on the phone as he walked to his car, "call Eric to my office tomorrow first thing. And prepare all the company succession documents from the last 5 years. He drove quickly to St. Patrick's Cathedral, his heart racing with every red light he caught. He couldn't lose Emma again. Not now that he knew the truth, not now that he understood how much he had been manipulated. He parked haphazardly near the cathedral, ignoring the valet who approached. The sun was already setting, painting the New York sky in shades of orange and pink. As he turned the corner, he saw a group of homeless people forming an orderly line. And there she was, serving soup with a gentle smile, her belly more visible under the white apron. Alexander stopped, observing the scene. Emma was talking to each person, giving them genuine attention. It was a side of the city that he, from the heights of his business empire, had never really seen. A world where his Emma had survived alone, carrying his children, while he lived deceived in his bubble of luxury and lies. He approached slowly, feeling the aroma of hot soup mixed with the incense coming from the cathedral. Emma saw him, and for a moment their eyes met again. This time, however, Alexander wouldn't let her run away. He had much to explain, much to fix, and mainly, much to learn from this woman who, without knowing, had completely transformed his life. The cathedral courtyard was almost empty when Emma finally finished serving the last portions of soup. Alexander remained distant, patiently observing as she said goodbye to the volunteers and put away the last utensils. The sky was completely dark now, and the cathedral lights cast elongated shadows on the stone ground. "Why are you here?" Emma asked, without turning, sensing his approach. "Because I discovered that my entire life was built on lies," he responded, his voice laden with an emotion that surprised even himself. "And because you're carrying my children." Emma finally turned to face him, her green eyes shining with a mixture of exhaustion and distrust. What lies? I was never sterile, he revealed, taking a step forward. My cousin Eric conspired with my doctor to forge the diagnosis. I just found out. Emma's expression softened for a moment, but she quickly composed herself. And why would he do that? Money, power, control over the company's succession. Alexander ran his hand through his hair, a rare gesture of nervousness. Without heirs, he would be next in line for succession. A cold wind blew through the courtyard, making Emma shiver slightly. Alexander instinctively removed his jacket, offering it to her, which after a moment of hesitation she accepted. "Where are you living?" he asked, noticing the deep circles under her eyes. "I'm managing," she responded evasively. "Emma, in a shelter for women, okay?" she finally admitted. "But it's temporary. I'm saving money doing some sewing work." Alexander's heart tightened. The idea that the mother of his children was living in a shelter while he occupied a 5,000-square-foot penthouse was unbearable. "Come with me," he pleaded. "I have an empty apartment in the Upper East Side." "You can—" "No," she interrupted him firmly. "I don't need your charity, Alexander." "It's not charity." He took a deep breath, controlling his frustration. "They're my children too. I have responsibility." "Responsibility?" She laughed humorlessly. "And where was that responsibility when you left me alone with an envelope of money?" The words hit him like a slap. Emma continued, her voice trembling slightly. "You know why I'm in a shelter? Because when I discovered the pregnancy, I was living as a favor in a friend's house. When the belly started to show, her husband began to ask questions, insinuate things. I had to leave. The money you left? I used it all on prenatal exams, vitamins, proper nutrition to ensure they would be born healthy." Alexander felt the weight of each word. His arrogance, his fear, his misguided decisions. Everything had contributed to putting Emma in this situation. "Let me fix this," he pleaded, his voice softer. "Not for you, not for me, but for them." Emma protectively placed her hand over her belly. "And how do you intend to do that? First, let me ensure that you and the babies have comfort and safety. Then I'll expose all of Eric's lies, regain full control of the company that is rightfully mine. And then I want the chance to prove that I can be a good father. And maybe," he hesitated, "maybe deserve a second chance with you." A heavy silence settled between them. In the distance, the sound of the cathedral bells announced 8 o'clock. "I can't go back to the shelter today," Emma finally confessed, her voice low. "I missed the entry deadline because of the volunteer work." "Come with me," Alexander offered again. "No pressure, no commitments, just a safe place to spend the night. Tomorrow you decide what you want to do." Emma looked at the cold New York night, then at her now visible belly, and finally at Alexander. There was something different in his eyes now, a vulnerability she had never seen before. "One night," she agreed finally, "and tomorrow we'll talk more." As they walked to Alexander's car, neither of them noticed the figure watching them from the shadows. Eric Harrison lowered the cell phone with which he had photographed the scene, a cold smile forming on his lips. His cousin was about to discover that some lies have much deeper consequences than one might imagine. Alexander's apartment in the Upper East Side was exactly as Emma remembered from the only night they had spent together. Spacious, elegant and impersonal, like a page from a decorating magazine that no one really inhabited. She remained standing near the entrance, feeling out of place in her simple jeans and loose shirt. "You must be hungry," said Alexander, breaking the awkward silence. "I can order something." "Actually," she interrupted him, "I'm more tired than hungry. If you could show me where I'll sleep." Alexander led her to the guest room, a spacious room with a view of the illuminated city. "The bathroom has everything you might need. And here," he opened a closet, "I have some new clothes that might fit. I bought them for my sister, but she never came to pick them up." Emma nodded, still uncomfortable with the situation. When Alexander left the room, she finally allowed her shoulders to relax. She walked to the window, observing the city below. Her hand instinctively caressed her belly when she felt one of the babies move. In the closet, she found a new silk nightgown, still with the tag. After a long shower, her first hot shower in weeks, she put on the garment and sat on the king-size bed, feeling simultaneously grateful and apprehensive. A soft knock on the door surprised her. "Emma? I brought some chamomile tea and some cookies in case you change your mind about being hungry." She opened the door, finding Alexander still in his business attire, though the tie had already disappeared and his shirt sleeves were rolled up. For a moment, their gazes met and a familiar current of electricity passed between them. "Thank you." She took the tray, breaking the moment. "But you don't need to worry so much." "Emma." He ran his hand through his hair in a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "There's so much we need to talk about." "Tomorrow," she interrupted him gently. "Please." He nodded, respecting her space. "Sleep well." After he left, Emma sat in the armchair near the window, sipping the tea while her mind wandered to the past. She remembered her life before the streets, when she worked as a seamstress in a luxury atelier, the accident that claimed her parents' lives, the debts she inherited, the downward spiral that led her to lose everything. Her cell phone, an old model with a cracked screen, vibrated with a message. Her heart froze when she saw the sender. "You still owe me, Princess. And now I know exactly how you can pay." In the living room, Alexander was also lost in thought, an untouched glass of whiskey in his hands. His phone rang, displaying Eric's name. "What do you want?" he answered dryly. "Cousin, I heard you cancelled all your appointments today. Any problem?" Eric's falsely concerned tone made Alexander's blood boil. "None that you don't already know about." "I don't know what you're talking about," Eric laughed softly. "But since you mentioned it, perhaps we should discuss the future of the company. I have some interesting revelations to share." "Tomorrow, Eric. In my office, 8 a.m. As you wish. Oh, and Alexander, send my regards to your guest." The line went dead, leaving Alexander with a growing sense of unease. How did Eric know about Emma? In the guest room, Emma stared at the message on her cell phone, silent tears rolling down her face. The past she had tried so hard to leave behind was coming back to haunt her, and now it wasn't just her life at risk. Night advanced over New York, and in that luxurious apartment, two restless hearts awaited the dawn, each carrying their own secrets and fears. Fate had brought them together again, but the shadows of the past threatened to obscure any possibility of a future together. Morning arrived with a typical New York drizzle. Alexander was already in his office at 7:30 a.m., reviewing old company documents. Each page revealed more inconsistencies, all somehow connected to Eric. His cousin had been more meticulous in his conspiracy than he had imagined. At 7:55 a.m., Sarah hurriedly entered. "Mr. Harrison, your cousin Eric is here, and there's something you need to know." He brought a lawyer and a court officer. Alexander felt his jaw tense but maintained his composure. "Send them in." Eric entered with his characteristic smug smile, followed by two men in suits. "Good morning, cousin. I hope I'm not interrupting anything or anyone." "Get to the point, Eric." The cousin sat down comfortably, adjusting his Italian suit. "I heard you found out about the little arrangement with Dr. Matthews. Impressive how some secrets don't stay buried, isn't it?" "Little arrangement?" Alexander stood up, his voice controlled but laden with fury. "You manipulated my entire life." "Please," Eric laughed. "I did you a favor. The company needed stability, certainty about its succession. And you were always too emotional for some decisions." The court officer cleared his throat, extending an envelope. "Mr. Harrison, this is for you." Alexander opened the document, his face paling as he read. It was a court summons, alleging mismanagement and requesting his temporary removal from the company's presidency. "It's just a preventive measure," Eric explained, still smiling. "After all, an emotionally unstable man suddenly discovering he's a father, living with a homeless woman? The board will be concerned." "How did you—" "Ah, I have my contacts, including some that your girlfriend knows well. People to whom she owes favors, let's say." At that moment, Alexander's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Emma. "We need to talk. Urgent." "You have two options, cousin." Eric stood up, adjusting his tie. "You can fight, expose the whole scheme with Dr. Matthews, try to keep your position, and see all the dark secrets of the mother of your children come to light. Or you can accept a temporary leave with generous financial compensation, of course." Alexander felt the blood boil in his veins. Years of manipulation, lies, and now explicit blackmail. But something in his mind clicked. Eric wouldn't know about Emma if he didn't have connections to her past. "How long do I have to decide?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "Until the end of the day. I'm a fair man after all." Eric walked to the door but stopped before leaving. "Oh, and Alexander?" Tell Emma that some debts need to be paid no matter how much time passes. As soon as he was alone, Alexander picked up the phone. He needed to talk to Emma, to understand what secrets she carried, and most importantly, to protect her from Eric. But the call went straight to voicemail. He quickly returned to the apartment only to find the guest room empty. On the perfectly made bed, there was only a note. "I'm sorry, Alexander. There are things from my past that could harm you and the company. I can't let that happen. Don't look for me. It's better this way. Emma?" Alexander held the paper tightly, crumpling it slightly. Eric had planned everything meticulously, using Emma's past as a weapon. But his cousin had made a crucial mistake. He underestimated what Alexander was willing to do to protect his family. He picked up the phone again, this time dialing a number he hadn't used in years. "Charlie, this is Alexander Harrison. Remember when you said you owed me a favor? I need you to find someone for me. And I need to know everything about my cousin Eric's connections with loan sharks and debt collectors." The hunt was just beginning, and Alexander knew he had to be faster than Eric. Somewhere in New York, Emma was carrying not only his children, but secrets that could destroy or save everything he had built. The afternoon was falling over New York when Charlie, a former private investigator, met Alexander in a discreet cafe in Midtown. The place was practically empty, except for a few hurried executives seeking their daily dose of caffeine. "You're not going to like what I found," said Charlie, sliding a folder across the table. "Your cousin has connections with a group of loan sharks operating in the garment district. They specialize in lending money to desperate small business owners." Alexander opened the folder, finding photos and documents. His stomach turned when he saw Emma's name on one of the old contracts. The date coincided with the period of her parents' accident. "The sewing atelier where she worked was doing well," Charlie continued, "but after losing her parents, she inherited substantial debts from their medical treatment. She tried to keep the business running, but she needed quick money," Alexander completed, feeling a tightness in his chest. "Exactly. And guess who was the real owner of the loan company?" Alexander closed his eyes, already knowing the answer. "Eric. Your cousin built a parallel empire of loan sharking. He uses privileged information from Harrison Enterprises to identify struggling businesses, offers predatory loans, and then absorbs the companies when they can't pay," Alexander completed, his voice laden with disgust. "How many lives has he destroyed?" Charlie took a sip of his coffee before continuing. "Emma managed to pay part of the debt, but when the atelier failed, she still owed a considerable amount. Eric kept the debt active, probably knowing that one day he could use it against someone." "Against me," muttered Alexander. "He must have found out about our night together and started monitoring her." "There's more," Charlie hesitated. "I managed to track her cell phone. It's moving through the garment district near some old sewing workshops." Alexander stood up immediately, but Charlie held him back. "Wait, Eric's people are watching the area. If you show up, you might put her at risk." At that moment, Alexander's cell phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "St. Patrick's Cathedral, 7 p.m. Come alone. E." "I need your help, Charlie," said Alexander, already formulating a plan. "I want all the documents that prove Eric's illegal activities, and I need you to monitor his movements tonight." "Alexander," Charlie warned him, "your cousin isn't just a corrupt businessman. He has dangerous people working for him." "And I have something more important to protect now," Alexander responded, looking at Emma's photo that was in the file. "A family." Meanwhile, in a small sewing workshop in the garment district, Emma was sewing quickly, her skilled hands moving with precision over the fabric. She had managed to get temporary work thanks to old contacts, but she knew she couldn't stay in the same place for long. "Your sewing is impeccable," commented the owner of the place, an elderly lady. "Are you sure you don't want a permanent job?" Emma smiled sadly, her hand resting on her increasingly visible belly. "I can't, Mrs. Johnson, but thank you." She looked at the clock. 5:30 p.m. She would have to leave soon to get to the cathedral at the agreed time. She didn't want to involve Alexander any further in this story, but after receiving more threats from Eric, she realized she needed to tell the whole truth. Outside the workshop, a man was talking on the phone. "She's here, Mr. Harrison. She should be leaving soon." Night was approaching, and with it the promise of a confrontation that would forever change the lives of all involved. At Harrison Enterprises, Eric observed the city through his window. a cold smile on his lips as he planned his next move. The fate of one of the country's largest companies, the future of a family not yet formed, and the lives of dozens of people who had been harmed by Eric converged on a single point. St. Patrick's Cathedral at 7 p.m. The bells of St. Patrick's Cathedral were chiming to announce 7 p.m. when Alexander parked his car a block away. The night was exceptionally cold for a New York autumn, and a fine mist hung over the streets of Midtown, creating an almost cinematic atmosphere. Walking cautiously, Alexander observed every shadow, every movement. Charlie's words echoed in his mind. Eric had dangerous people working for him. But none of that mattered now. His priority was Emma and the babies. As he approached the cathedral, he spotted a female figure leaning against one of the pillars in the courtyard. Emma. His heart raced, but before he could call out to her, he noticed a suspicious movement in the nearby shadows. "Emma, watch out!" he shouted, running towards her. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. Two men emerged from the shadows, grabbing Emma by the arms. Alexander lunged at them but was stopped by a third man who appeared from behind. What a touching scene! Eric's voice cut through the air as he emerged from the darkness. The hero running to save his beloved. Too bad real life isn't a fairy tale, isn't it, cousin? "Let her go, Eric," growled Alexander, struggling against the man holding him. "Your problem is with me." Eric laughed, approaching Emma. "Oh, but you're mistaken. My problem has always been with both of you. You the legitimate heir I couldn't simply eliminate. And her, the little seamstress, who refused to be just another piece on my chessboard." Emma, still held by the thugs, stared at Eric with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I already told you, I have no way to pay that debt." "But you do, darling," Eric smiled maliciously. "You do. You see, with you pregnant with my dear cousin's children, the possibilities are endless. Imagine the scandals, the headlines. Harrison heir impregnates homeless woman. That alone would tank the company's stock." Alexander felt his blood boil. "You wouldn't dare." "Wouldn't I? Cousin, I've dared much more." Eric turned to him. "Who do you think orchestrated the accident of her parents? An unfortunate traffic incident that left them with astronomical hospital debts. The perfect scenario for my loan scheme." The shock of the revelation hit Emma like lightning. Tears began to roll down her face as the terrible truth unfolded. You killed my parents," she whispered, incredulous. Eric shrugged, as if discussing the weather. "Business is business, darling. Nothing personal." At that moment, the sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, rapidly approaching. "Looks like we have company," Eric frowned. "A pity. I was enjoying our little family reunion." "It's over, Eric," Alexander spoke, a new vigor in his voice. "The police have all the evidence of your illegal activities. Charlie delivered everything." Eric's face paled for an instant, but he quickly regained his composure. "Always the Boy Scout, aren't you, Alexander? But you forget that I have powerful connections. One night in jail, and I'll be free before breakfast." The sirens were getting closer. Eric's thugs started to get nervous, looking to their boss for guidance. "Let them go," Eric ordered, adjusting his tie. "This isn't over, cousin, far from it." As the men released them and quickly dispersed, Alexander rushed to embrace Emma, who was trembling uncontrollably. "It's all right now," he murmured, stroking her hair. "You're safe." But Emma pulled away, looking at him with tear-filled eyes. "No, Alexander, nothing is all right. Your parents, my parents, all of this is a huge mess." The police vehicles arrived, illuminating the cathedral courtyard with their flashing lights. Officers jumped out of the cars, running towards Eric, who, surprisingly, offered no resistance. As he was being handcuffed, Eric cast one last look at the couple. "This isn't over, Harrison. One battle isn't the war." Alexander hugged Emma protectively, watching his cousin being taken away. "No, Eric, for you it is over." But as the sirens faded away and the night became quiet again, Alexander knew that many challenges still awaited them. The truth about Emma's past, Eric's manipulations, and the uncertain future of Harrison Enterprises weighed heavily on them. However, with Emma in his arms and the promise of a family to come, Alexander felt, for the first time in a long time, that he was on the right path. The dawn would bring new challenges, but they would face them together. The weeks following Eric's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions and challenges for Alexander and Emma. The scandal involving Harrison Enterprises dominated the headlines, and the empire Alexander had inherited from his father seemed to be crumbling before his eyes. On a sunny Saturday morning, Alexander found himself in his office in the penthouse, surrounded by piles of documents and reports. The soft sound of footsteps made him look up, finding Emma standing in the doorway, her belly now prominent at 6 months of pregnancy. "You promised today would be a day of rest," she said, her voice a mixture of concern and affection. Alexander sighed, running his hand through his already disheveled hair. I know, it's just that there's so much to be done. So many lives affected by Eric's schemes." Emma approached, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "And you're doing everything you can to fix it. But you can't carry the world on your shoulders, Alexander." He held her hand, kissing it softly. "You're right, as always." "Let's go for a walk," Emma suggested. Central Park is beautiful this time of year. As they walked along the tree-lined paths of the park, Alexander couldn't help but notice the looks and whispers of people who recognized them. The scandal was still fresh in the public's mind. "Ignore them," Emma murmured, squeezing his hand. "They don't know our story." Alexander nodded, but his thoughts wandered to the emotional roller coaster of the past few weeks. The revelation about Eric's involvement in the tragedy of Emma's parents had been devastating for both of them. Emma spent days processing the information, alternating between moments of deep sadness and intense anger. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked, interrupting his reverie. "About how lucky we are," he answered, surprising even himself with the sincerity of his words. "Despite everything, we're here, together." Emma smiled, her hand instinctively caressing her belly. "The babies are restless today. I think they agree with you." They found a bench by the lake, watching the swans gliding gracefully across the water. The contrast between the serenity of the park and the chaos they faced in the outside world was striking. "I received a call from Dr. Matthews yesterday," Alexander commented after a moment of silence. Emma turned to him, surprised. "The doctor who falsified your tests?" Alexander nodded. "He wants to testify against Eric. Says he has evidence of other schemes, things we hadn't even imagined." "That's good, isn't it?" Emma asked hesitantly. "It's complicated," Alexander sighed. "Each new revelation further shakes investors' confidence." "The company is bleeding, Emma." She held his face between her hands, forcing him to look into her eyes. "Listen to me, Alexander Harrison. You are stronger and smarter than Eric ever was. You will build something new, something better, something based on integrity and compassion." Her words touched Alexander deeply. It was exactly what he needed to hear. "You know," he said, a small smile forming on his lips, "I was thinking about transforming some of the company's properties into training centers, offer training and opportunities for people who were affected by Eric's schemes." Emma's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "That's wonderful. And how about a special program for single mothers? Daycare centers, professional courses?" As they discussed ideas, Alexander felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Yes, the road would be long and difficult, but with Emma by his side, he felt capable of facing any challenge. Suddenly, Emma gasped, bringing her hands to her belly. "What is it?" Alexander asked, alarmed. She took his hand, placing it on her belly. "Feel that? They're kicking." Alexander remained still, marveling at feeling his children's movements for the first time. Tears formed in his eyes, and he realized that no matter how difficult the challenges ahead, these small moments made everything worthwhile. "Thank you," he murmured, kissing Emma softly. "For what?" she asked, wiping a tear that was rolling down his face. "For not giving up. For giving me a second chance. For these miracles," he replied, caressing her belly. As the sun began to set over Central Park, Alexander and Emma remained embraced, feeling their children's movements and dreaming of the future they would build together. The road ahead would be challenging, but they were ready to face it one step at a time with love and determination. The New York summer was at its peak when Emma went into labor, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Alexander, who had barely left her side in recent weeks, was in an important meeting with investors when he received the call. "The babies are coming!" Sarah's voice, now the couple's personal assistant, sounded frantic over the phone. Without hesitation, Alexander stood up in the middle of the presentation. "Gentlemen, I apologize, but my children are being born. We'll continue this another time." Leaving behind a group of stunned executives, he rushed to the hospital, his heart beating frantically. Upon arrival, he found Emma already in the delivery room with Sarah by her side. "You made it!" Emma exclaimed between labored breaths. Alexander held her hand, kissing it softly. "I wouldn't miss this for anything in the world." The following hours were an emotional roller coaster. Emma demonstrated a strength Alexander had never imagined, and when they finally heard the first cry, quickly followed by the second, the world seemed to stop. "Congratulations," the doctor announced. "They're two beautiful and healthy boys." With tears in his eyes, Alexander cut the umbilical cords, and soon the twins were in Emma's arms. Looking at those small lives, the fruits of an unexpected love and a turbulent journey, Alexander felt an indescribable emotion. "Welcome, Michael and Nathan," Emma whispered, gently kissing each one's forehead. In the days that followed, while Emma and the babies recovered in the hospital, Alexander divided his time between family and the challenges he still faced at the company. The news of the birth of the Harrison twins was received with a mix of curiosity and tenderness by the public, offering a welcome break in the whirlwind of scandals of recent months. A week after the birth, with the small family now at home, Alexander received an unexpected visit. Mr. Anderson, the candy seller who had been instrumental in his search for Emma months ago, appeared at the apartment door. "Mr. Anderson," Alexander exclaimed, surprised. "What a pleasure to see you. Please come in." The gentleman, visibly emotional, entered timidly. "Sorry to come without notice, Mr. Harrison. It's just that, well, I wanted to see little Emma and the babies." Emma, who was breastfeeding Nathan on the couch, smiled when she saw her old friend. "Mr. Anderson, how wonderful to have you here." The candy seller approached, looking tenderly at the twins. "They're beautiful, Emma. They look like two little angels." Alexander observed the scene, feeling a wave of gratitude. It was then that an idea began to form in his mind. "Mr. Anderson," he began, "remember when we met in the company lobby?" The gentleman nodded, curious. "Well, we're reshaping many things at Harrison Enterprises, and one of them is creating a support program for small entrepreneurs. I'd like you to be our consultant on this project." The old vendor's eyes widened. "Me? But I'm just a candy seller, Mr. Harrison." Emma, who immediately understood Alexander's intention, intervened. "Mr. Anderson, you have years of experience on the streets. You know the difficulties, the real needs of people. Your wisdom is exactly what we need." Moved, Mr. Anderson accepted the proposal. This was just the first of many steps that Alexander and Emma would take to transform Harrison Enterprises into something greater than a simple business conglomerate. In the months that followed, as the twins grew, the couple worked tirelessly. The training center for single mothers, Emma's initial idea, became a reality. Old company properties were converted into learning and opportunity spaces. On a sunny afternoon, almost a year after the twins' birth, Alexander and Emma were strolling through Central Park, pushing the baby's stroller. They stopped at the same bench where, months earlier, they had felt the baby's first kicks. "Can you believe everything that's happened?" Emma asked, watching Michael and Nathan play with their rattles. Alexander smiled, embracing her shoulders. "Sometimes it feels like a dream, but then I look at you three and I know it's real, and that every difficult moment was worth it." At that instant, as if orchestrated by fate, his cell phone rang. It was his lawyer. "Alexander," the voice sounded excited on the other end of the line. "The jury just delivered the verdict. Eric has been convicted. He won't bother you anymore." A weight that Alexander didn't even know he was still carrying seemed to dissipate. He shared the news with Emma, who hugged him tightly. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." "No," Alexander replied, looking at his children and the woman he loved. "It's just beginning. Our true story, our family, our legacy, everything is just beginning." As the sun set over New York, bathing the park in golden hues, Alexander Harrison felt a peace he had never experienced before. The path had been tortuous, full of challenges and painful revelations, but each step had led him exactly where he was meant to be. With Emma by his side and his children smiling in the stroller, he knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Harrison Enterprises was becoming a symbol of transformation and hope, and his family was the beating heart behind this change. And so, amidst baby laughter and the murmur of the city around them, a new era began for the Harrisons, full of promises, love, and endless possibilities. 5 years passed since that afternoon in Central Park. Harrison Enterprises had transformed into a model of ethical business and social responsibility, and Alexander and Emma's story inspired people throughout the United States. It was a Saturday morning when Alexander woke up to the sound of children's laughter coming from the kitchen. He found Emma making pancakes, while Michael and Nathan, now 5 years old, enthusiastically helped, spreading more flour than mixing. "Daddy!" the twins shouted in unison upon seeing him, running to hug him with hands full of batter. Alexander laughed, hugging them back. "Good morning, my little chefs." Emma watched the scene with a smile, her hand unconsciously caressing her slightly swollen belly. They were expecting their third child, a girl. "We have a surprise for you," Emma said, exchanging a complicit look with the boys. Nathan ran to get an envelope hidden in the drawer, proudly handing it to Alexander. Inside was a handmade invitation. "We invite you to Family Day at school. Come see our projects and meet our new teacher. Monday, 10 a.m. "Did you make this?" Alexander asked, genuinely moved. Michael nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, and Aunt Sarah helped us with the difficult letters." Alexander smiled, thinking about how Sarah had become an integral part of their lives, much more than a simple assistant. "I wouldn't miss it for anything," he assured, carefully tucking away the invitation. The weekend passed quickly, and on Monday Alexander and Emma arrived at the twins' school, an institution that was part of Harrison Enterprises' social project, offering quality education to children from all social classes. As they entered the classroom, they were greeted by a young teacher with curly hair and a welcoming smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, what a pleasure to meet you in person," she greeted them warmly. "I'm Lisa, the boys' new teacher." As they talked, Alexander noticed something familiar about Lisa, but couldn't quite place it. It was Emma who made the connection first. "Lisa, didn't you participate in our training program for young educators 2 years ago?" The teacher's eyes lit up. "Yes. It was thanks to that program that I was able to complete my education. I can't believe I'm now here teaching your children." The realization hit Alexander like a wave. There, right in front of him, was the tangible result of their efforts to transform the company and positively impact lives. The morning was filled with activities. The twins proudly presented their projects, from paintings to small scientific experiments. Alexander and Emma interacted with other parents, many of whom had similar stories of how Harrison Enterprises programs had changed their lives. During the break, while the children played in the courtyard, Alexander stepped aside a bit, observing the scene. Emma found him a few minutes later. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, intertwining her fingers with his. Alexander took a deep breath, his eyes misting. "About how everything has changed, about how close we came to losing all this." Emma nodded, understanding. "But we didn't lose it. We're here building something meaningful." At that moment, Mr. Anderson appeared, accompanied by a group of young entrepreneurs who were participating in the company's mentorship program. "Mr. Harrison," he called out excitedly, "look who's come to visit the school." Alexander and Emma greeted the group, listening to stories of how the program had transformed their lives and businesses. The pride in Mr. Anderson's eyes was evident as he introduced his pupils. As they talked, Michael and Nathan came running, followed by their classmates. "Daddy, Mommy!" Nathan exclaimed. "Can we show everyone the school garden?" The garden was a special project, initiated by Emma, that taught children about sustainability and healthy eating. "Of course," Emma replied, smiling. As the group headed to the outdoor area of the school, Alexander found himself surrounded by a mix of excited children, hopeful young entrepreneurs, and grateful parents. The scene was a microcosm of everything they had built over the past few years. Looking at Emma, who was passionately leading the garden tour, at his children happily running between the garden beds, and at the people around him whose lives had been touched by their initiatives, Alexander felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Harrison Enterprises was no longer just a company. It was a movement, a force for positive change that spread far beyond the limits of New York City. On that simple Monday morning, in a school in the heart of the city, Alexander Harrison understood that he had found his true purpose. And with Emma by his side and a new life on the way, the future had never looked so bright and full of possibilities. Summer was coming to an end in New York City, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings. In the Harrison penthouse, The first rays of sun found Alexander already awake, contemplating the awakening city below. Beside him, Emma slept peacefully, her 8-month pregnant belly rising and falling gently with each breath. That morning, Harrison Enterprises completed 7 years since its major restructuring. 7 years since Alexander and Emma decided to transform not only their lives, but the lives of countless people around them. The phone vibrated discreetly. It was a message from Sarah. "Everything's ready for today's ceremony. The press is already arriving. Good luck." Alexander smiled, recalling the journey. Today's ceremony would mark the inauguration of the company's largest project to date, the Harrison Educational Complex, a campus that would bring together everything from daycare centers to vocational courses, all free and aimed at underprivileged communities. Emma stirred, slowly opening her eyes. "Good morning," she murmured, smiling as she saw Alexander. "Good morning, my love," he replied, leaning in to kiss her softly. "How are you two today?" "Anxious," Emma laughed, caressing her belly. "I think Lily knows today is a big day." As they prepared for the day, the twins burst into the room, already dressed in their fancy clothes, a little suit for Michael and a dress for Nathan, who from an early age showed his gender fluidity, something the parents unconditionally supported. "We're ready, Daddy," announced Michael. "Can we go now?" added Nathan, twirling to show off his dress. Alexander and Emma exchanged a look of pride. Their children, now almost 6 years old, were the living reflection of everything they believed in: love, acceptance, and the pursuit of a better world. The family arrived at the ceremony site shortly before 10 a.m. The Harrison Educational Complex was impressive, a set of modern and sustainable buildings surrounded by green areas and communal spaces. As they walked towards the stage set up for the inauguration, they were greeted by familiar faces and new ones. Mr. Anderson, now director of the Social Entrepreneurship Program, waved enthusiastically. Lisa, the twins' teacher they had met years ago, was there with a group of educators, all eager to start working in the new complex. When Alexander took the stage to give his speech, silence fell over the crowd. Emma, seated in the front row with the twins, smiled encouragingly. 7 years ago, Alexander began, his voice firm, I believed that success was measured by the zeros in the bank account and the size of the empire we built. Today I know that true success lies in the smiles we help create, in the opportunities we offer, and in the lives we transform. He paused, his eyes scanning the audience. This complex is not just a set of buildings. It's a symbol of hope, of second chances, of a future where everyone has the opportunity to grow and prosper. It's the result of a dream shared by many of you here present. Alexander then invited Emma to the stage. Together they continued the speech, alternating their words harmoniously, as they did in all aspects of their lives. Every brick in this place, Emma said, carries the story of someone who believed in change. From the young entrepreneurs who provided sustainable materials, to the mothers who participated in planning the daycare centers, every detail was thought out with love and purpose. At the end of the speech, as the couple prepared to cut the inaugural ribbon, Emma suddenly brought her hand to her belly, her expression changing from surprise to realization. "Alexander," she whispered, "I think Lily has decided she wants to participate in the inauguration too." Amid the commotion that followed, with Emma being quickly taken to the hospital, Alexander found himself faced with a choice. But it wasn't really a choice, he knew. "Sarah," he called, handing her the symbolic keys to the complex. "You lead the ceremony from here. I trust you." With a nod of understanding from Sarah and applause from the crowd, Alexander departed with Emma for the hospital, the twins accompanied by Mr. Anderson. Hours later, in a delivery room very different from the one 6 years ago, Lily Harrison came into the world. Her first cry coincided exactly with the moment when, miles away, Sarah cut the ribbon inaugurating the Harrison Educational Complex. Holding his newborn daughter, with Emma smiling exhaustedly beside him and the twins napping on the room's sofa, Alexander felt a completeness he had never imagined possible. "Welcome to the world, Lily," he whispered. "You've just been born into a place a little bit better than it was yesterday, and I promise we'll work every day to make it even better for you and for everyone." Emma extended her hand, intertwining her fingers with Alexander's. No words were necessary. The look they exchanged said it all. Gratitude for the journey traveled, love for the present lived, and hope for the future they were building together. Outside, the sun was setting over New York City, ending a historic day not just for the Harrison family, but for the entire city. A day that marked not an end, but a new beginning. A dawn of possibilities, of dreams realized, and promises of a brighter future for all. And so, with Lily's birth and the inauguration of the educational complex, a new page was turned in the Harrison story. A story of love, overcoming, and the eternal pursuit of a better world, one act of kindness at a time.